It is late November 1942, and somewhere in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, two men are trying to kill each other. Vasily Zaytsev lies motionless beneath a pile of shattered brick, his breath shallow, his eye pressed to the scope of his Mosin Nagant rifle. He has not moved in hours. Somewhere out there, hidden among the destroyed factories and collapsed walls, a German sniper is watching, waiting. The Germans call him the super sniper. They say he was sent from Berlin specifically to kill Zaytsev. For 4 days now, neither man has revealed his position. One shot will end this, one mistake. By this point, Zaytsev has killed over 200 enemy soldiers. His name appears in Soviet newspapers from the Caucasus to the Urals. German troops have become terrified to raise their heads in daylight. But none of that matters now. In this moment, the hunter has become the hunted. To understand how a peasant boy from the Ural Mountains became the most feared sniper at Stalingrad, we must go back to a 12-year-old, trudging through the taiga snow, carrying a rifle almost as big as himself, learning lessons that would one day make him a legend. Vasily Grigorievich Zaytsev was born on the 23rd of March 1915 in the village of Yeleninskoye in the Orenburg region of the Russian Empire. His family were peasants, poor but resourceful, living in the shadow of the Ural Mountains. It was a hard land that demanded hard people. The winters were brutal. Food was never guaranteed. And from the earliest age, Vasily learned that survival meant knowing how to hunt. His grandfather was an experienced hunter who had spent his life tracking wolves, deer, and whatever else moved through the vast Siberian taiga. He took his grandson into the wilderness before the boy could properly read. Together they would spend days in the frozen forest, tracking animals through the snow, setting traps, sleeping in makeshift shelters with nothing but fur and fire to keep them alive. The grandfather taught Vasily patience. He taught him to move without sound. He taught him to watch and wait, sometimes for hours, until the perfect moment presented itself. Bullets were expensive and scarce in those remote villages. You could not afford to miss. One shot, one kill. That was the rule. If you wasted ammunition, you went hungry. Vasily learned this lesson early. At the age of 12, he brought home his first real trophy, a wolf. He had tracked it for the better part of a day, carrying a large single-barreled Berdan rifle that was so heavy he could barely hold it steady. When the moment came, he did not hesitate. One shot. The wolf dropped. His grandfather said nothing, but his eyes told Vasily everything he needed to know. These were the skills that would later make him deadly. Not just marksmanship, though he had that in abundance. It was the patience. The ability to lie still for hours without moving a muscle. The cold precision of a hunter who understood that the difference between eating and starving was often a single well-placed bullet. In the taiga, Vasily Zaytsev learned to kill. He did not yet know that history would demand he use those skills on a very different kind of prey. As he grew older, Zaytsev proved himself intelligent as well as capable. He attended technical school in the industrial city of Magnitogorsk, training as a fitter and later studying accounting. In 1937, at the age of 22, he was conscripted into the Red Army. But instead of being sent to an infantry unit where his shooting skills might have been noticed, Zaytsev found himself assigned to the Soviet Navy, specifically to a desk. He was stationed in Vladivostok on the Pacific coast as a clerk in the finance department of the fleet headquarters. It was a comfortable position, safe. Far from any fighting, his commanders appreciated his work with numbers and paperwork. For 5 years, Vasily Zaytsev filed reports and processed payments, while the world outside descended into chaos. Then, in June 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa unleashed the largest military offensive in human history. 3 million German soldiers poured across the border. Soviet armies were encircled and destroyed. Millions of Red Army soldiers were killed or captured in the first months alone. The Wehrmacht advanced with terrifying speed, and by autumn they were approaching Moscow itself. Zaytsev read the reports. He heard the news. and he could not bear to sit behind a desk while his countrymen were dying. He submitted a request to transfer to the front lines. The request was denied. He submitted another. Denied again. A third request. A fourth. A fifth. Each time his superiors refused. He was too valuable where he was. The finance department needed him. There was no place for a clerk on the front lines. But Zaytsev would not stop asking. By the summer of 1942, the situation had changed. The Germans had been stopped before Moscow the previous winter, but now they launched a new offensive in the south. Their objective was twofold. First, to seize the oil fields of the Caucasus, which would fuel their war machine. Second, to capture the city that bore the name of the Soviet leader himself, Stalingrad. The city sat on the western bank of the Volga River, stretching for nearly 50 kilometers along the water. It was an industrial center, home to massive factories that produced tanks, artillery, and ammunition for the Red Army. The Stalingrad tractor factory alone could build hundreds of T-34 tanks per month. But more than its strategic value, Stalingrad had become a symbol. For Hitler, capturing Stalin's city would be the ultimate humiliation of his rival. For Stalin, losing it was simply unacceptable. Both dictators poured men and material into the battle, without regard for the cost. On the 23rd of August, 1942, the German Luftwaffe launched the most devastating air raid of the entire war on the Eastern Front. Over 1,000 aircraft bombed Stalingrad, reducing much of the city to rubble in a single day. Estimates suggest that 40,000 civilians died in the first week of bombing alone. The city burned. And still, the Soviets refused to evacuate. General Vasily Zaytsev was given command of the 62nd Army on the 12th of September. His task was simple to state and nearly impossible to achieve. Hold the city. Do not let the Germans reach the Volga. When he met with his superiors to receive his orders, they asked him what he thought. His response would become famous. "We will defend the city or die in the attempt." Zaytsev understood that conventional tactics would not work in Stalingrad. The Germans had overwhelming superiority in tanks and aircraft. In open terrain, the Red Army would be slaughtered. But in the ruins of a destroyed city, those advantages could be neutralized. Zaytsev ordered his men to stay as close to the German lines as possible, sometimes just meters away, so that enemy aircraft could not bomb them without hitting their own troops. Fighting became intimate and brutal, room by room, floor by floor. Soldiers fought with rifles, grenades, knives, and bare hands. It was into this apocalypse that Vasily Zaytsev's sixth transfer request was finally approved. He was assigned to the 1047th Rifle Regiment of the 284th Rifle Division, which itself was part of Zaytsev's 62nd Army. On the night of the 22nd of September 1942, Zaytsev and his fellow reinforcements prepared to cross the Volga. The crossing was a death sentence for many. German artillery had zeroed in on the river. Enemy aircraft patrolled constantly. In the weeks before Zaytsev's arrival, 32 Soviet ships had been sunk, trying to ferry men and supplies to the western bank. Reinforcements crossed at night, under cover of darkness, praying that German shells would miss their boats. Many prayers went unanswered. Zaytsev made it across. He stepped onto the western bank of the Volga and into a city that no longer resembled anything human. Stalingrad was a landscape of fire and rubble. Buildings that had once housed families were now skeletal frames of twisted metal and shattered concrete. The air smelled of smoke, cordite, and death. Bodies lay everywhere, Soviet and German alike, often left where they fell, because retrieving them meant exposing yourself to enemy fire. He was assigned as an ordinary rifleman, not a sniper, just one more body to throw into the meat grinder. He fought in the streets alongside thousands of others. He engaged in hand-to-hand combat. At one point he received a bayonet wound, but he never left the ranks. He kept fighting. And then his commanding officer noticed something. "For us, soldiers and commanders of the 62nd Army, there is no land beyond the Volga," Zaytsev would later say. "We stood and will stand to death." He meant every word. But what neither he nor anyone else knew yet was that Vasily Zaytsev was about to become something far more valuable than an ordinary soldier. Within weeks, his name would be known across the entire Soviet Union, and German soldiers would learn to fear the man they called the Hare. The moment that transformed Vasily Zaytsev from an ordinary soldier into a legend happened in early October 1942. The details vary slightly depending on the source, but the essence of the story remains consistent across all accounts. Zaytsev was positioned somewhere in the industrial district when his commanding officer spotted movement in a ruined building approximately 800 meters away. A German officer had appeared in a window, perhaps surveying the battlefield, perhaps simply careless. 800 meters is a long distance for any rifle shot. With a telescopic sight in ideal conditions, an experienced marksman might make it. But Zaytsev did not have a telescopic sight. He was still carrying his standard-issue Mosin-Nagant rifle with nothing but iron sights, the kind of rifle given to every infantryman, the kind of rifle not designed for precision shooting at extreme range. His commanding officer pointed out the target. Zaytsev raised his rifle, adjusted for distance and wind, and fired. The German officer dropped. Moments later, 2 more German soldiers appeared in the same window. Perhaps they were checking on their fallen comrade. Perhaps they wanted to see what had happened. It did not matter. Zaytsev fired twice more. Both men fell. 3 shots, 3 kills, 800 meters, iron sights. His commanding officer stared at the young soldier from the Urals with new eyes. This was not an ordinary rifleman. This was something else entirely. Zaytsev was immediately awarded the Medal for Bravery. But far more importantly, he was given a new weapon. A Mosin-Nagant model 1891/30, fitted with a Pu 3.5 power telescopic sight, a proper sniper rifle. What his commanders did not yet realize was that Zaytsev had already killed 32 German soldiers before this moment, all with iron sights, all without recognition. He had been doing the work of a sniper without the title or the tools. Now he had both. Between the 10th of November and the 17th of December 1942, Vasily Zaytsev would be credited with 225 confirmed kills. The number is staggering even by the standards of Stalingrad, where death was measured in the thousands every day. Among those 225 were 11 enemy snipers, men who were themselves hunters, men who understood concealment and patience and the deadly mathematics of a well-aimed shot. Zaytsev killed them all. He developed his own methods through trial and error, learning what worked in the unique environment of urban warfare. Stalingrad was not like the forests of his childhood. There were no trees to climb, no natural blinds to hide behind. Instead, there was rubble, endless fields of shattered brick and twisted steel, collapsed floors that created unexpected sight lines, water pipes large enough to crawl through, sewers that connected different parts of the city underground. Zaytsev used all of it. He learned to vary his positions constantly. After a few kills from one location, he would move. It might be observed, he reasoned. A pattern might emerge. Enemy spotters might triangulate his position from the direction of his shots. So he never stayed anywhere long enough to be predictable. He would fire once, maybe twice, and then disappear into the ruins like a ghost. He was not alone in this work. His primary partner was a soldier named Nikolai Kulikov, who served as his spotter and collaborator. Together, they developed what they called hide and sting tactics. One would observe while the other prepared to shoot. They would identify targets, calculate distances, account for environmental factors, and then strike with lethal precision before vanishing. The partnership made both of them more effective than either could have been alone. General Chuikov himself took notice of the snipers operating in his sector. He would later describe meeting Zaytsev and his fellow marksmen with words that revealed just how different these men were from ordinary soldiers. "I was struck by their modesty," Chuikov wrote, "their unhurried movements, their invariably calm character, their probing gaze. They could look at one spot for a long time without a flicker of their eyelids. These were not men who charged into battle screaming. These were men who waited, watched, and killed with cold efficiency." Soviet command quickly recognized that Zaytsev's skills were too valuable to be limited to one rifle. If he could be so effective, why not train others to fight the same way? The decision was made to establish a sniper school, and Zaytsev was placed in charge of it. The school was set up in the cellars beneath the Lazoo chemical plant, one of the few structures in the factory district that still offered some protection from German artillery. Down in those dark tunnels, Zaytsev taught everything he knew. Students practiced shooting at helmets mounted on sticks. They aimed at observation slits and torso-shaped outlines painted on walls. They learned patience, concealment, the art of the single killing shot. The students began calling themselves the Zaytchata, the little hares. It was a play on their teacher's name. Zaytsev, in Russian, means hare. And so the hare trained his little hares in the ways of the hunt. But Zaytsev did more than simply teach marksmanship. He developed tactical innovations that would outlast the war itself. His most significant contribution was a formation he called the Sixes. The concept was simple but devastatingly effective. A sniper team would consist of 6 soldiers arranged in 3 pairs. Each pair contained 1 sniper and 1 spotter. The 3 pairs would position themselves at different angles, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered the same zone from multiple directions. An enemy who spotted one pair might think he had located the threat, only to be killed by fire from a completely different position. The Sixes formation proved so effective that it continued to be used by Russian military forces for decades after the war. Observers noted its use during the conflicts in Chechnya in the 1990s. The tactical doctrine, created by a peasant hunter in the ruins of Stalingrad, was still killing enemies 50 years later. The Zaytchata spread out across the city. By the end of the war, Zaytsev's students would be credited with over 6,000 confirmed kills. One man had become a force multiplier. His legacy was measured not just in his own body count, but in the thousands of enemies killed by the soldiers he trained. As Zaytsev's reputation grew, Soviet propaganda seized upon his story. His name began appearing in army newspapers. Tales of his exploits were printed and distributed to troops across the front lines. In the Caucasus, in Crimea, even in his home region of the Urals, soldiers read about the sniper who was terrorizing the Germans at Stalingrad. He became a symbol of resistance. Proof that one determined Soviet soldier could strike fear into the heart of the invader. The psychological impact on the German troops was profound. Soldiers became afraid to expose themselves during daylight hours. Raising one's head above cover could mean instant death. Officers in particular learned to be cautious. They were priority targets, and the snipers of Stalingrad had become terrifyingly accurate at identifying and eliminating anyone who appeared to be in command. Word of the sniper threat reached German headquarters. Something had to be done. The constant attrition of officers and experienced soldiers was damaging morale and disrupting operations. According to Soviet accounts, the Germans decided to respond in kind. They would send their own expert, a counter-sniper whose mission would be to find and eliminate the man they blamed for their troubles. The chief hare. The hunter who had stalked wolves as a child and Germans as a man was about to discover what it felt like to be prey. Somewhere out there, a new enemy was coming. And unlike the 200 soldiers Zaytsev had already killed, this one knew exactly who he was looking for. The rumors reached Zaytsev through the usual channels. Scouts had captured a German prisoner somewhere in the factory district. During interrogation, the prisoner revealed something that changed everything. The Germans had brought in a specialist, a sniper of extraordinary skill, dispatched specifically to Stalingrad with a single mission: find the Soviet marksman who was terrorizing German troops, kill him, end the sniper threat once and for all. Soviet accounts would later identify this man as Major Erwin Koenig, allegedly the head of the German sniper school in Berlin. Some sources called him Heinz Thorwald. The names varied, but the message was consistent. Someone very dangerous had arrived, and he was hunting for Zaytsev. Whether Zaytsev believed the stories or not, he could not ignore what happened next. 2 of his fellow snipers, experienced men named Morozov and Shakin, were wounded by precision rifle fire in the same sector within days of each other. These were not novices who had made careless mistakes. These were trained marksmen who understood concealment and fieldcraft. Whoever had shot them was operating at a level above ordinary German riflemen. The evidence suggested that the rumors were true. A master had entered the ruins. Zaytsev knew the handwriting of German snipers. He had studied their methods for weeks, learning to distinguish experienced shooters from beginners, patient hunters from nervous amateurs. This new enemy was different. There were no careless shots, no visible positions, no patterns to exploit. Somewhere in the devastation of Stalingrad's industrial district, a ghost was waiting. Zaytsev and his partner Nikolai Kulikov began a methodical search. They moved through the ruins with painstaking care, studying every potential hide, every shadow, every pile of rubble that might conceal a man with a rifle. Zaytsev compiled diagrams of the terrain, marking positions that offered good sight lines and noting features that might serve as concealment. He was looking for the place where he would hide if he were the German, the place that offered the best combination of cover, visibility, and escape routes. Days passed. The German did not reveal himself. This was the hardest part, not the shooting. Zaytsev could shoot. The challenge was finding a target that refused to be found. Every hour that passed without contact was another hour of tension, another hour of wondering whether the next moment would bring a bullet through his skull. The German was out there, watching, waiting for Zaytsev to make the first mistake. On getting to the edge of the battle area, camouflage yourself, lie stock still and observe. These were Zaytsev's own words, his own teachings. Now he was experiencing what it meant to face an enemy who followed the same principles. Two predators, each invisible to the other, each waiting for the other to blink. By the third day, Zaytsev had narrowed his focus to a specific area. The terrain suggested several promising locations for a sniper hide. One feature in particular caught his attention. A sheet of metal lay across a pile of bricks near a destroyed building, creating a small sheltered space beneath it. It was exactly the kind of position a skilled marksman would choose, protected from observation, offering a narrow but effective field of fire, easy to enter and exit without being seen. But was anyone there? Zaytsev could not simply fire at the position and hope for the best. If the German was not there, the shot would reveal his own location. If the German was there but not killed, the return fire would be immediate and lethal. He needed confirmation. He needed the German to expose himself. On the fourth day, Zaytsev and Kulikov devised a plan. Kulikov would take a helmet and raise it slowly above their cover, mounted on a stick. The movement would be careful and deliberate, exactly as an inexperienced sniper might raise his head to observe the battlefield. If the German was watching, if he was as skilled as they believed, he would recognize the opportunity. He might take the shot. It was a gamble. Kulikov would be exposing himself to enemy fire, trusting that the German would aim for the helmet rather than looking for the man holding the stick. If the German was patient enough to wait for a better target, if he suspected a trap, the plan would fail, or worse. Kulikov raised the helmet. For a long moment, nothing happened. The ruins were silent. The helmet moved slightly, mimicking the small adjustments a real observer might make. Then the German fired. The bullet struck the helmet. Kulikov threw himself backward, crying out as if wounded, letting the helmet fall. To any observer, it would appear that a Soviet sniper had just been killed. Zaytsev did not move. He kept his eye pressed to his scope, watching the area where he suspected the German was hiding. The sheet of metal over the bricks. The small dark space beneath it. If the German believed he had made a kill, he might raise his head to confirm. He might allow himself a moment of satisfaction. Seconds passed. Each one stretched into eternity. Then Zaytsev saw it, a glint of light from beneath the metal sheet, just for an instant, a reflection of sunlight on glass or metal. A scope, a rifle barrel, something that should not have caught the light unless it had moved. The German was raising his head. Zaytsev fired. The bullet covered the distance between them in a fraction of a second. Through his scope, Zaytsev saw the German's head drop. The man did not move again. His rifle remained where it had fallen, the scope catching the fading afternoon light. It would stay there until nightfall, a silent testament to the duel's conclusion. 4 days of patient waiting, 4 days of invisible warfare. And it had ended in a single second. The duel went on for 3 days, Zaytsev would later write, though some accounts say 4, but it ended in our victory in a matter of seconds. That night, under cover of darkness, Zaytsev retrieved the German's rifle scope as a trophy. It would eventually find its way to the Central Armed Forces Museum in Moscow, where it remains to this day. Physical evidence of a contest that has become the most famous sniper duel in history. And yet, the truth is more complicated. Historians who have examined the evidence have found no German military records confirming the existence of Major Erwin Koenig, no documents from the Berlin Sniper School, because no such school appears to have existed in 1942 or 43. Antony Beevor, one of the most respected historians of the Stalingrad battle, examined Russian Ministry of Defense archives and concluded that the story was likely a fabrication. The whole story of the sniper duel, he wrote, was a clever figment of Soviet propaganda. Some researchers have suggested alternative candidates for the German sniper. One theory proposes Corporal Hermann Stoff of the 295th Infantry Division, a marksman credited with 103 kills who died at Stalingrad. But no definitive identification has ever been made. What we know for certain is this: Vasily Zaytsev killed 11 enemy snipers during his time at Stalingrad. Something happened in those ruins. Whether the specific man called Koenig existed exactly as described, whether the duel unfolded precisely as Zaytsev remembered it, these questions may never be answered with certainty. But perhaps the literal truth matters less than what the story represented. 2 masters of their craft, hunting each other through the apocalypse. The knowledge that somewhere in the destruction, an equal was watching. The psychological weight of being both hunter and hunted, that was real. The fear it inspired in German soldiers was real. The hope it gave to Soviet troops was real. And when Zaytsev walked out of those ruins alive, having killed whatever enemy had been sent to stop him, the legend became unstoppable. By January 1943, the tide at Stalingrad had turned decisively against the Germans. 2 months earlier, on the 19th of November, the Soviets had launched Operation Uranus. While the German Sixth Army remained fixated on capturing the city block by block, massive Soviet forces swept around both flanks in a devastating pincer movement. Within 4 days, the trap had closed. Nearly 300,000 German and Axis soldiers found themselves completely encircled. Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus requested permission to break out while escape was still possible. Hitler refused. The Sixth Army would hold its ground. Supplies would be delivered by air. Relief forces would break through. None of it happened. The Luftwaffe could not deliver a fraction of the supplies needed to sustain an army. The relief attempt stalled in the frozen steppe. Inside the pocket, German soldiers began to starve. They ate horses. They ate rats. They froze in their summer uniforms because winter gear had never arrived. And still, Hitler refused to authorize a retreat. But the fighting was not over. The encircled Germans continued to resist with the desperation of men who had nothing left to lose. Every building, every ruin, every frozen cellar had to be taken by force. Soviet casualties continued to mount even as victory became inevitable. Zaytsev was still in the city, still hunting. In mid-January, he received orders to take his sniper group and disrupt a German attack on the right flank of a neighboring regiment. It was the kind of mission he had performed dozens of times before. Move into position, identify targets, eliminate officers and machine gunners, create chaos in the enemy ranks while Soviet infantry pressed the assault. He had only 13 snipers under his command for this operation. They moved through the ruins with practiced efficiency, taking up positions that offered overlapping fields of fire. The German attack came. Zaytsev and his men went to work. And then a mortar round exploded nearby. The blast threw Zaytsev to the ground. Shrapnel tore through the air. When he tried to open his eyes, he saw nothing, only darkness. He blinked, rubbed his face, felt blood running from wounds around his eyes. He was blind. The man whose extraordinary vision had killed over 200 enemies could no longer see the hand in front of his face. The war, for Vasily Zaytsev, appeared to be over. He was evacuated from Stalingrad by aircraft, one of the last flights out before the Soviet noose tightened completely. Doctors examined his eyes and delivered a grim assessment. The damage was severe. There was little they could do. But the Soviet military was not prepared to give up on their most famous snipers so easily. Zaytsev was transferred to Moscow and placed under the care of Professor Vladimir Filatov, one of the most renowned ophthalmologists in the world. Filatov had founded the Institute of Eye Diseases and Tissue Therapy in Odessa. He was a pioneer in corneal transplantation, a man who had restored sight to patients others had deemed hopeless. Over the following weeks, Filatov performed multiple operations on Zaytsev's damaged eyes. The work was delicate and uncertain. There were no guarantees. Each surgery brought hope, followed by anxious waiting to see if the treatment had worked. On the 10th of February 1943, Vasily Zaytsev opened his eyes and saw light. His vision had been restored, not perfectly perhaps. The eyes that had once picked out targets at 800 meters might never be quite the same. But he could see. The darkness had lifted. The miracle had happened. 12 days later, on the 22nd of February, Zaytsev was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest honor his country could bestow. His rifle, the Mosin Nagant with the PU scope that had killed so many enemies, was presented to the best sniper students at his school to carry on his legacy while he recovered. Meanwhile, at Stalingrad, the end had finally come. On the 2nd of February 1943, Field Marshal Friedrich Paulus surrendered what remained of the German Sixth Army. It was a shattering moment for the Wehrmacht. No German field marshal had ever surrendered before. Hitler had promoted Paulus to that rank just one day earlier, expecting that he would choose suicide over capitulation. Paulus chose to live. Approximately 91,000 German soldiers marched into Soviet captivity that day. Frozen, starving, many already sick with typhus and dysentery, they faced a grim fate. The death rate in Soviet prisoner of war camps was catastrophic. Of those 91,000, only about 6,000 would survive to return home after the war. The rest would die in captivity, buried in mass graves across the Soviet Union. The total human cost of Stalingrad defies comprehension. Soviet military casualties exceeded 1 million, with approximately 480,000 killed. German and Axis forces suffered around 800,000 casualties. Civilian deaths added another 40,000 or more. In total, nearly 2 million human beings were killed, wounded, or captured in the fight for a single city. But the strategic significance matched the human tragedy. Stalingrad marked the turning point of the war on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht had lost an entire army, irreplaceable veterans and equipment that could never be recovered. From this point forward, the Germans would be on the defensive. The road to Berlin had begun. Zaytsev missed the victory. He was still recovering in Moscow when Paulus surrendered, but his war was not over. Once his vision had stabilized, he returned to active duty. He no longer served as a sniper. Whether his eyesight had recovered enough for precision shooting, or whether his commanders simply considered him too valuable to risk in that role again, the records do not say. Instead, Zaytsev was given command of a mortar platoon. Later, he rose to lead an entire company. He fought in the liberation of the Donbass region. He crossed the Dnieper River with the Soviet armies pushing west. He fought near Odessa, the city where Professor Filatov had built his famous institute. He advanced along the Dniester. By the spring of 1945, Captain Vasily Zaytsev had reached the Silo Heights, the last major defensive line before Berlin itself. And there, in the final battles of the war, he was wounded again. On the 9th of May 1945, when Germany finally surrendered and the Soviet Union celebrated Victory Day, Vasily Zaytsev was lying in a hospital bed. The war that had taken so much from so many was finally over. He had survived it, but just barely. In the days immediately following the German surrender at Stalingrad, before Zaytsev had been evacuated for his eye surgeries, representatives from Moscow's Historical Commission had arrived in the ruined city. Their mission was to document what had happened, to record the testimonies of those who had fought and survived. Over the following weeks, they interviewed 214 soldiers, civilians, and officers amid the rubble. Zaytsev was among those interviewed, and his words, recorded in those transcripts, revealed something that the propaganda stories never captured. Behind the legend was a human being who had witnessed horrors beyond description. One sees the young girls, the children who hang from trees in the park, he said. His voice, the interviewers noted, was unsteady. I have unsteady nerves, and I am constantly shaking. The sniper who had remained motionless for hours while hunting his targets, who had faced down an enemy marksman in a 4-day duel without flinching, was shaking as he described what he had seen. The man who never missed could not stop his hands from trembling. War makes legends, but it breaks the men inside them. After the war, Zaytsev returned to civilian life. He settled in Kyiv, in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and enrolled in a textile institute. He studied engineering. He married. Eventually, he rose to become the director of a textile factory. It was a quiet life, far from the frozen ruins where he had become famous. In 1951, Soviet authorities detained him on suspicion of espionage. He spent 2 years in a detention center before being released without charges. The experience was never publicly discussed. Whatever happened during those years, Zaytsev kept it to himself. He lived long enough to see the Soviet Union begin to crumble. On the 15th of December 1991, Vasily Grigorievich Zaytsev died in Kiev at the age of 76. 11 days later, the Soviet Union itself ceased to exist. He was buried in Kyiv, in a cemetery far from the city where he had become a legend. But that was not where he wished to rest. For 15 years after his death, Zaytsev's final wish remained unfulfilled. Then, on the 31st of January 2006, the 63rd anniversary of the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, his remains were exhumed from Kyiv and brought home at last. With full military honors, Vasily Grigorievich Zaytsev was reburied at Mamayev-Kurgan, the hill where some of the fiercest fighting had taken place, where 34,505 defenders already lay. He was placed near General Chuikov, the commander who had first recognized his talent. His rifle still stands in the Stalingrad Panorama Museum. His 6's formation is still taught to snipers today. His students killed over 6,000 enemies. But perhaps his truest legacy lies in his own words. A good sniper is a sniper alive, he once said. A sniper's feat is so that he does his job again and again. The boy who learned to hunt wolves in the Urals had understood something essential. Survival was its own kind of victory.